Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Trade and Tariff Survival Guide. My name is Florence Chéron, and I'll be your moderator. I work with the membership team here at the French-American Chamber of Commerce in New York, and I'm excited to be hosting this session today. I'm pleased to introduce today's speaker, Michael Cohn. Michael is a custom international trade and regulatory compliance attorney, partner at FisherBroyles. Michael Cohn practices in the area of administrative, custom, and international trade law. He counsels clients on a broad array of regulatory compliance issues, falling under the jurisdiction of U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and a variety of other federal agencies. In the tariff arena, Mr. Cohn helps companies save on custom duties and other governments fees through readily available strategies such as tariff engineering, classification reviews, administrative protests, sourcing from regions that have a preferential trade agreement with the U.S., foreign trade zone utilization, duty drawback programs, first-sales planning, buying agency agreements, and other planning techniques. He also assists clients with tariffs matter before the U.S. International Trade Commission and the U.S. Department of Commerce involving countervailing and anti-dumping duties, as well as special tariff measures such as those enacted by the Trump administration. Michael will share how to navigate the current challenges of trade regulation and tariffs and the latest on the Trump administration's international trade activities, policies, tariffs, and potential avenues for mitigating the impact of various retaliatory action. Before I hand the mic over to Michael, I have a few housekeeping items to cover before this presentation. First, today's webinar will be available on demand after the live session. We will send you the link and presentation after the webinar. Next, we'd love to hear from you during today's presentation. If you have a question for Michael, please feel free to send it through the question tab. We'll be answering the question at the end of the session. If we don't get to your question during today's webinar, we will be sure to follow up afterward. And last, we'd like to encourage you to share today's webinar with your social network. We will be posting the recording on our website and social medias as well. So without any further ado, I'd like to kick things off by welcoming Michael Cohn. Michael, over to you.
Thank you, Florence, and good afternoon to those of you participating from the United States, and good evening to those of you participating from Europe. I'm delighted to be here to present some basic information on how to address the Trump tariff nightmare that many importers and international companies are enduring, and also to provide some basics with regard to customs law obligations, because we have some people on the phone who are not experts in this area, but who are consultants or other interested parties. So after I do a basic introduction, I'm going to get more into what's going on with the Trump tariffs, and in particular, what we are looking at with the EU Airbus retaliatory duties that we expect to be enacted. Before I launch into the substance of the presentation, which will take about 30 minutes, and then we'll open it up for a few minutes of question and answer, I'd like to tell you a little bit about my background. I have been practicing customs and international trade law for 24 years now. I began my career in practice with Judge R. Kenton Musgrave of the United States Court of International Trade, where I was a law clerk. From there, I moved to the venerable firm that is no longer with us, called Couder Brothers. I also worked at Baker & McKenzie, which at the time was the biggest international law firm, and many of you will know that Madame Christine Lagarde was a partner there before she went on to higher and better things. And I remained in customs and international trade since I began my career here in New York City in 1995. So I've worked with very large companies, Fortune 500 companies, Global 500 companies, as well as small mom and pop places. Interestingly, a lot of them have the same issues, the compliance issues, and also have to deal with different federal agencies, including customs. So whether you are in a large company or a small company, what we're talking about today will affect you and is important for your compliance. So let's start now with the substance. Okay, so customs law, there are three basic compliance obligations. There are many obligations, but the three basic ones are classification, valuation, and country of origin. And under the United States law, it is the importer's responsibility to ensure compliance with all customs obligations. One might think that it's the customs broker's responsibility or the customs lawyer's responsibility to get everything correct. And while we do have independent obligations as brokers or lawyers to render competent and correct advice, we say the buck stops here with the importer. And if there is ever an enforcement issue, if customs ever comes knocking on the door, it doesn't work to blame somebody else. And so that is a very important aspect to bear in mind, that it is the importer's responsibility to comply with all of these obligations. And if something happens and there is non-compliance and customs gets involved, then it's going to come right after you, the importer. There are a variety of different sorts of customs duties. We call customs duties that appear in the harmonized tariff schedule of the United States normal customs duties. And we say that because those customs duties will apply to goods coming from any country. And it'll be a standard rate. There are certain exceptions for bad guys. North Korea, for example, has a much higher rate than people who aren't on the bad list. But those normal customs duties are payable regardless of where the good originates, what country produced them. Anti-dumping and countervailing duties are different types of duties. I'll talk about them briefly a little bit later. Those don't appear in the harmonized tariff schedule of the United States. Those duties are arrived at by U.S. importers who petition the U.S. International Trade Commission and saying, hey, we're getting hurt by these unfair imports. So those are a type of special duties, but they have particular names, anti-dumping and countervailing duties. The Trump tariffs, the special Trump tariffs, these special customs duties, I generally refer to as retaliatory duties. There are also national security duties that are in place. So, for example, the aluminum and metal tariffs that went into place are national security special duties, and what we're looking at with the Airbus dispute, those are retaliatory duties where the U.S. believes that the subsidies that the EU provides to Airbus are wrongful under the WTO, and the WTO has agreed that they're wrongful and is in the process of calculating the amount of duties that the United States would be allowed to assess in retaliation. We'll be talking more about this shortly. So again, it's U.S. Customs and Border Protection, which is responsible for enforcing not just its own laws, and the central ones are classification, valuation, country of origin in terms of an importer's responsibility of compliance, but also CBP, that is Customs and Border Protection, enforces the laws of over 40 different agencies at the border. So you're listening to someone right now who belongs to an unusual group of folks, customs attorneys, who we develop a broad-based federal regulatory practice and awareness, because if we're working with a food importer, we have to learn FDA. If we're working with a fur or crocodile handbags, we have to know U.S. Fish and Wildlife. If we're working with bicycles imported from any country, we have to know Consumer Product Safety Commission laws. And so we as customs attorneys are very specialized, and we develop cross-agency expertise. So keep that in mind as importers, and if you're counseling importers, that it's not just classification, country of origin, and valuation that you have to get correct. If you're importing crocodile handbags, you need to get your CITES your CITES documents in place as well. I mention that just to make sure that those folks out there who have other agency issues and those people who are becoming familiar with customs law are also familiar about this aspect of bringing goods into the United States. They must comply not just with customs laws, but with all federal agency laws. So it's the statute that requires an importer to get compliance correct is 19 U.S.C. section 1484. And it requires the importer of record to use, quote, reasonable care. That's the standard. You have to use reasonable care to enter, classify, and determine the value of imported merchandise, and to provide any other information necessary to enable CBP to properly assess the duties. If there's an enforcement action, there's a different statute called 19 U.S.C. section 1592, which we in our area of law call section 592. And severe penalties exist when customs determines that there's been an underpayment of customs duties, or in fact, for example, a misdeclaration of country of origin. And what I've hyperlinked to there is an article that I published in October 2014 that discusses the penalty statute and the broadening of liability under a very important decision from the appellate court called the U.S. Court of Appeals from the Federal Circuit. That is the appellate court for customs issues. So you can hyperlink to that and read that if you need a cure for insomnia. Next, I want to talk about classification. So an importer must properly classify its goods under the Harmonized Tariff Schedule of the United States, HTS-US. Under the auspices of the WTO, formerly the GATT, classification has been harmonized to the 6-digit level. We have 8 digits. We have an additional 2 levels of classification. The WTO, through the Harmonized Tariff Schedule, HTS, has made sure that the whole world is operating consistently with respect to classification at a certain level. And yet it allows additionally for sub-classifications. I've included here Roquefort and loaves. That's a special interest of mine. I've had some success there. Here you can see the normal duty rate of 2.7% for Roquefort and whole loaves. So now, of course, many of you on this call today will know that Roquefort only comes from one place in France. So it's not like Roquefort can come from Italy because it is a special geographic designation. But here what you can see is the Harmonized Tariff Schedule and the normal duties that apply to Roquefort. That's classification. Valuation is also very important. Customs duties are normally calculated based on an ad valorem percentage of the appraised value of the imported good. Ad valorem, I'll go up. You can see it's 2.7% for whole loaves of Roquefort. And so if you have $100 worth of Roquefort that you're importing, then you pay $2.70 in customs duties. That means that it's important for you to determine the value of the Roquefort that's coming in, because if it's really worth $200 instead of $100, you are going to underpay your customs duties by $2.70, and customs is very jealous of its revenue and will not be happy with that. So there are different issues with valuation. We don't have time to get into them today. Country of origin, extremely important today, right? So is your good coming from China? Is it made in China? Does it originate in China? If it does, it's going to get hit with special duties. So absent a free trade agreement, country of origin is based on a substantial transformation of a good in a country, resulting in a new name, character, or use of the good. This is extremely important. Examples that do not cause substantial transformation include a simple assembly. If you take, for example, components of a table, a wooden table, and screws, and you send them to China, and that table is assembled in China, it's unlikely that that will be determined to be a product of China. A simple assembly doesn't qualify. Or if you have the wood sourced in China and you have everything you need to assemble it, the screws, all the wood, and you send it from China to Vietnam, and Vietnam just assembles it there, might not be from Vietnam. Customers might think it really comes from China and subject to special duties. Mixing items does not create a new good. Shipping, here's a crucial one, shipping the finished good from or through a different country. This happens all the time. We call it transshipment. Sometimes parties do it knowingly, knowing that if they take something from China, for example, and ship it to Vietnam and then enter it as goods of Vietnam, sometimes they know it really isn't something that was made in Vietnam, but customs might not find out. At the same time, there is broad misunderstanding out there about what country of origin, what the standard for a country of origin is. And there is a misunderstanding, a common misunderstanding, that you can just take a finished good and ship it to another country and then bring it imported directly from a third country, say Vietnam, and call it Vietnamese instead of Chinese. And that is also incorrect. And what we're seeing more and more right now, I call customs the new NSA. Customs has tremendous computing power. They've also restructured themselves, and they are a lot more aware of what's going on out there, and they can trace things a lot more than they used to. And it's very important to get country of origin and other things correct. And I would say 20 years ago, there was a very low risk of customs alerting to a broad variety of non-compliance. That risk is much greater today due to AI and the computer platforms and the restructuring of customs. So quickly, anti-dumping and countervailing duties. Anti-dumping duties seek to offset the sale of goods into the United States at what's less than fair value. People argue about what's less than fair value and why should we be fighting against goods that come in that are cheap. Our U.S. domestic producers say this is unfair competition. Countervailing duties seek to offset the sale of goods into the United States that have benefited from foreign governmental subsidies. Is that the same thing as the U.S., the Airbus dispute? Yeah, we're talking about subsidies there. Could there be a countervailing duty that's placed on different goods because of the subsidies? Yes, but we're looking at something different today. And today we're looking specifically at these special customs duties. And they're being enacted under Section 201 and Section 301 of the Tariff Act of 1974. President Trump, as we all know, really likes this ability to hammer different trading partners that he believes have not played fairly on the international scene. Those of us who were able to study economics and understand absolute advantage and comparative advantage, we understand that, of course, it's fine if we get these cheaper goods from other countries. They may produce it more efficiently or relatively more efficiently. This is not a political point. This is an economic point. And I don't really think that the president understands how much harm he's doing to the U.S. consumer. And we as customs attorneys are clearing houses. We see so much harm out in the manufacturing industry from these new these special duties. And I'm not talking about special duties on a plastic pail from China. I'm talking about specifically inputs that come in from our U.S. manufacturers. And the manufacturers take a year, or 6 months to a year, to figure out their pricing. These special duties have upended everything. And you can see from the decline in manufacturing right now that this is starting to have a deep effect on us. And so we've seen goods containing aluminum and steel hit with special duties. We've seen goods from China. We've seen, I think, 3 rounds on goods from China now. I was able to help a client determine that its goods weren't subject to the first round of goods, special duties on goods from China, and saved that client $5.5 million in 2019. And now we're seeing the president and the USC are coming in to sweep up everything else. So at least they'll get the $5.5 million in savings from this year, probably, or most of it. But everything from China is going to get swept up. So aerospace and other goods imported from the EU. This is the Erebus subsidy dispute. Is this unfair? Yes, it's unfair. Does the United States subsidize Boeing? Yes, it does. But life isn't fair, and we need to look at and address this specifically and see what we can do as importers and people who consult and help importers address this and also assess risks. So the EU goods currently targeted by the USTR, there are two lists out there. The first list is from April 12th, and I'm going to click on this hyperlink here so that everybody can see it, and so that I can look at it. And this was published in the Federal Register. And I'm going to go through this you notice, and you can see now down at the bottom. So here are the items. So in section 1, there are two sections in this first list. Section 1, it's going to hit the following goods, as you can see in that first paragraph, from France, Germany, Spain, or the UK. You can see that they're aerospace specific. New helicopters, for example. Undercarriages and parts of new civil aircraft. And then there's a second section here. And what is the USTR trying to do here? It's trying to kick everybody where it counts. And they hit patrimony here. They hit very sensitive items. Take a look for future reference at the bottom, 0406.20. That's Roquefort cheese, grated or powdered. And there are several other cheeses here. What you do not see here is Roquefort in whole loaves. We're going to pick that discussion up again shortly as we move along quickly. And now I also I need to go back here, right? Okay, let me first click on a Dropbox. And then I'm going to show you, oops, sorry. Where are we now? Pardon me. Are we here? Okay. So let me go. So then there was another list, right? So how does this work? Well, there's a proposed list, and then the USTR comes out and says, hey, here's the proposed list. Now we're going to accept written comments from the public about whether this list should be is complete or thorough, whether items should be dropped off, and then people submitted comments. They were allowed to testify in front of the USTR, and then the USTR came out with a second list in July, and they added more stuff. And let's take a look at some of the other items that they added. You all have this PowerPoint, so you can go through this on your own, and hopefully when you click, you'll be able to see this as well. And so the USTR had some additional considerations, and they put in all kinds of stuff that's very sensitive. Parmigiano, right? Pork shoulders, pears, sodium nitrate, all kinds of things from certain different countries that are important to the industries. They're trying to hurt. The USTR again is trying to hurt as much as possible. This is how the trade wars work. Okay, so. Those are the lists for you, and you can click on those, and if you have any problem finding them, you can always email me, but those lists are key for you and your clients to figure out whether your goods are targeted. So avoiding special duties through USTR written comments and appearances. I will admit that I am proud of what happened here. We do not see Roquefort in loaves on this list. We will never know for sure whether my submissions to USTR resulted in removal from Roquefort from these proposed lists, but you can see there on my hyperlink back in March 2017, I submitted, and it went under the name of the first submission went under the name of one of my partners. The second one included my name, but I actually drafted both these things. The USTR was considering perpetuating the beef hormone war, which has now been resolved. But they were considering perpetuating it back in early, right when Trump got first into office. And so the USTR requested written comments about whether certain items should be included on the list because they were proposed for inclusion. And you can see that we submitted here a discussion as to why Roquefort was not appropriate for inclusion on a retaliatory list. Let me say that in this case, just like in the EU Airbus case currently in front of us, the duties might go as high as 100% on any given good. We won't know yet. I'll get to that in a second. I'm moving along. But anyway, we submitted these comments and some follow-up comments to the USTR, and we explained that it wouldn't do the United States any good to punish Roquefort because there are only 7 producers who have no voice in the EU. They're not involved in this dispute. That most people in the United States who sell Roquefort are mom and pop specialty stores, and therefore retaliating against Roquefort would not accomplish the goal of causing pain. And lo and behold, when these new lists came up now for Airbus, they can contain all kinds of cheeses, but not Roquefort. So I'm proud of that. And what I'm doing, I'm explaining to you how the comment and testimony process works in case you'll ever encounter it again. But it's over now. That's all finished for EU Airbus. Now, I'm going to go now. Before I get to specific strategies, which I'll touch upon, I want to talk a little bit more about where we are with the EU Airbus situation. So what's the likelihood that these goods are going to be targeted? I think it's very high because the Trump administration has not had a solid history of resolving these disputes amicably. And this is a very thorny one. It's been going on for well over 10 years, EU Airbus dispute. And we also have a USTR, Robert Lighthizer, who obviously is taking out these tools from the International Trade War Toolbox, many of which haven't been used for decades. We haven't seen anything like this happen in the United States across the board since the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act back in the 30s, which everyone believes was a really bad idea. But this is a freight train we see coming, and we don't see anything public indicating that this particular dispute is going to be resolved before the duties are imposed. The USTR over the summer came out and said, we are waiting for the WTO arbitrator to determine what level of retaliatory duties are justified. So even though the United States subsidizes Boeing, the WTO also determined that the EU subsidizes Airbus. And so our government, the Trump administration, the USTR, is going after retaliatory duties due to the EU Airbus subsidies, which could involve as many as $11 billion, as much as $11 billion worth of goods. Now, part of the strategy of the Trump administration is to create as much confusion and lack of transparency as possible, in my view, to harm business interests as much as possible. And so we don't know exactly what the WTO arbitrator is going to say in terms of how many, what level of retaliatory duties are justified, but we also don't know what items on list 1 and list 2 that I showed you will be hit in the end, and what the level of retaliatory duties will be. So if the WTO arbitrator announces its decision, and the Trump administration this summer said it expects a decision from the WTO arbitrator sometime this summer, if the WTO arbitrator says, oh, you're authorized to retaliate up to $100 million, well, we could see all of those items on those 2 lists included, some at 10%, some at 50%, some at 100%. We could see several of them, but not all of them hit. And those several might be hit with 100% duties. So we are waiting. We are in a painful waiting game. But my best guess, my best estimation based on my experience and what we're seeing here is that these duties will come. We don't know exactly, again, if every item on the list will be hit, but we can expect that once the WTO arbitrator renders its decision on the level of duties that we can impose for retaliation, we expect the USTR to move swiftly to enact these new duties. Now, once that happens, there will be an opportunity to submit exclusion requests. That's not in this PowerPoint apologies for that, but you're going to have another bite at the apple to go into the USTR and say, hey, we did, this product, right? It's not a HCS US provision level exclusion. You don't get to come in and say, hey, tariff provision X is in your final list, you should take it off. No. What you get to do is you get to go in to the USTR and say, hey, our product is classified in this tariff provision, but for all these different reasons, our product should not be included. That's the reason I included for you this Roquefort submission. It was very carefully authored, okay? And I'll just say that in the follow-up comments, there's something in there about how Roquefort protects health. I thought about that for ages. You can't argue with success. You have to, for every given product, you have to think hard and come up with lots of different reasons, anything you can think of as to why this product should be excluded, and then seize on your best arguments and carefully submit those comments. And it's possible. It's not a fool's errand. It is possible. It's unlikely to get an exclusion, but it is possible. All right, so next slide, strategies to address the Trump tariffs. These are standard strategies. Some of you who are out there with whom I've been working may think that I'm talking about you, but I'm not. These are strategies that are used by companies across the board. You don't see it, but I see it, again, because I'm a clearinghouse for these difficult things. Companies across the United States and also international conglomerates are engaging in all of these strategies to try to mitigate what's happening. So as you can see from the lists, the Airbus lists, the retaliatory duties are enacted based on a tariff provision. Well, for a long, long time now, companies haven't been, generally speaking, in my experience, paying too much attention to their tariff classification because under the auspices of the WTO and formerly the GATT, since 1948 under Bretton Woods, tariffs have been coming down progressively over the years. And the last I knew, the normal tariff, the normal duties across the board for all goods was less than 2%. And so importers weren't worrying so much about whether, there are certain areas where duties are generally higher. Textiles and apparel, for example, are generally much higher. But there are all kinds of duty-free provisions for technology, for example, pharmaceuticals, and the average tariff rate across all items is less than 2%. So people didn't think so much about tariff classification because the financial consequences were minimal. This has changed now. Everybody potentially hit with the Trump tariffs is looking at the classification to say, hey, maybe I had been classifying this wrong. And even though it's where I've been classifying it under the tariff schedule is hit or is intended to be hit with a Trump tariff, I need to take a look at this and perhaps it's properly classified somewhere else. The success I had where I saved that company $5.5 million, this is exactly what happened. I looked at it and I said, I don't think where this classification, where you've been putting this is correct. And I think it's in a different spot. And that was successful. So a tariff classification review just looks at your current classifications, examines the goods, looks at the CBP rulings and the customs court's decisions and figures out whether those classifications are probably correct or incorrect. Now, there's also tariff engineering opportunity. I'm going to give you, so can you make changes to your products so they are properly classified in a tariff provision not subject to special duties? I'm going to give you a really simple example. Now, and I don't even know if something like this is targeted with a Trump tariff, but it will help you understand what tariff engineering is about. Tariff engineering is perfectly legitimate. It's done all the time. Let's say you had a garment, a shirt that was 60% polyester and 40% cotton. That is going to be classified under a provision for polyester shirt. Let's say that is subject to a Trump tariff. Well, guess what? You can change the fiber content of your shirt and make it, 60% cotton, 40% polyester. That will become a cotton shirt. If a cotton shirt is not targeted by a Trump tariff, but a polyester one is, then you can tariff engineer. And there is nothing wrong with it. It is one of the oldest concepts in U.S. customs law. There's a Supreme Court case from the late 19th century that says, hey, this is perfectly legitimate. And of course it is. There's no reason. You get to make the product you want, and classification is a legal issue, not a political issue. So you can create a product in your own design and intention, and however that's classified is the way it's classified. If it's a 60% cotton, 40% shirt, and it's not subject to a Trump tariff, hey, that's it. It's over. There's nothing wrong with designing your shirt in a way to avoid a Trump tariff. And there are potential ways to do that with a variety of different products. Some cannot be tariff engineered. Some can be. Third way to potentially deal with the Trump tariffs is sourcing in a different country. Now, this is obviously much more difficult. It's obviously much more difficult than tariff engineering or classification review. And companies out there who have factories or control factories, you know, boy, you're gonna build one in Vietnam and send to China. Maybe some people are doing that. Some people are resourcing their goods from Mexico. Right? So can you source in a different country by building a new factory or finding a different supplier in a different country? Yes, you can. Now, how does that affect the EU Airbus situation? Well, you know, are there inputs? It's a little different here, but there may be some sourcing opportunities to mitigate the EU Airbus tariffs that are coming. Then there's drawback. This is a very little known area of customs law. If you import something and then export that good or export something that's different but similar, you can actually recover your duties. Now I'm running out of time here, but I'm going to stop. But drawback is a way where you might be able to recover the duties you paid on imported goods by exporting goods that are identical or similar. That is a very simple way of pursuing drawback. There are some sophisticated, complicated ways of doing drawback, but drawback is also an opportunity out there. And one day these Trump tariffs will come to an end. And when they do come to an end, it will be possible, very likely, to simply import goods, pay the normal duties of, say, 2.7%, and then export them and recover the prior duties, special punitive retaliatory duties that you'd been paying previously. I'm going to stop now because I want to open up. Do we have any questions?
Yes.
So in the end, that's just a little bit about me. I do want to quickly click on this link here about my law firm. It was published in l'Anna Mur in 2016. I can't get it. Hold on. And FisherBroyles is a new age cloud-based firm. It's a very exciting place to be. We are highly efficient, and you can read about us there if you read French. And if you don't read French, you can read about us. Recently, Forbes did a review of cloud-based firms and featured us. So we're a very special place, but I don't have any more time for that, and so we'll address questions.
Thank you, Michael. We're now going to start the question and answers. We have some interesting question here. Okay, so what are the risks of an enforcement action by customs?
Okay, risk of enforcement by customs. It's generally low. How likely is it that customs is going to alert to a problem with your compliance? It's low. The problem with that is that the downside of an enforcement action is so severe, the business disruption and potential penalties are enormous. And I've worked with clients, and I'm working with clients now who have been involved in disputes for over 10 years. They take a long time to resolve, to go through the administrative process and then to fight it out of court if you need to. So the risks of enforcement are low, but in the event of enforcement, it's very painful. And that's why businesses are better off seeking to comply than not complying and trying to hide.
Thank you, Michael. We have another questions. Okay, so when will the Trump tariffs end?
I think the Trump tariffs will end when we have a new president. And we don't know whether we'll have a new president after the next election or not. When the Trump tariffs do end, then there will be opportunities for drawback. But what we're seeing now, again, it's highly unusual. We haven't seen anything like this since the 1930s. And I expect that any new president will have better sense than what's happening here with President Trump. But unfortunately, we don't know whether they're going to go away. And what the big problem this is causing right now for importers is sourcing. They might want to move production facility, for example, to Vietnam instead of China. But if they do that, and then Trump is defeated in the next election, we have someone new who says these are not sensible tariffs, then the remaining factors in China might have a greater competitive advantage. So the best guess is that they will end when President Trump, when he is gone, or when if he and the USTR are able to negotiate some very significant concessions from our trading partners, because he's not willing to negotiate or settle unless very significant concessions are provided.
Thank you, Michael. So we are coming to the end of our time here. So I would like to thank you all for your participation. Thank you, Michael, for this very engaging presentation. If you're interested in joining the FACC network or have questions, or if you already are a member and have questions, feel free to reach out directly to us. We will be sending details about this presentation by email to you right after this afternoon, and then we'll also be posting the recording of this presentation on our website and through social media. So thank you again, and we'll hope to see you soon at upcoming FACC events. Thank you, and bye-bye. Have a nice day.